Hey, it's Kim Sorges from Not Consumed, and today I kind of want to tonight, I want to share with you a message that is just really dear to my heart, something that as a parent has been really at the forefront of a lot of my thinking over the years, and especially this week. So we are going to talk about guarding or teaching your children to guard their hearts. And I want to tell you how I got onto this topic tonight. As I was sitting here, so tonight I glanced over at this pile of electronics that were left here at my house when my kids headed off to camp. Now they are, as I was looking at this pile of electronics, I couldn't help but think just how very different the world is today as a result of technology, right? We have filthy images and language at our fingertips. We have crude ads, extreme bullying, trafficking, just those are just a few of the things, right, that kind of make us sick as parents. And sometimes I wish that the world was just, a little more like it was when I was a kid. And then I think, wait a minute, back up the bus. When I was a kid, do I really want it to be like that? Yeah, okay, some of our methods have changed, but has the risk of exposure to some of these things really changed? Let me give you an example. When I was 12, I was cleaning the house for a neighbor. And, this was a lady that, well, it was a couple, married couple, but it was a lady that was primarily there during the day. And, my mom knew her and trusted her, and she lived right next door she still lives right next door, actually, to my mom, I think. Actually, I don't really know. Anyway, they lived next door for a really long time. We're friends for a very, very long time. And I went over there to help clean their house. And when I was there, I was shuffling some things and putting some things away and tripped over something that was underneath the bed. I'll let your imagination run wild. But I was 12 and didn't need to be exposed to that. Here's why I tell you this. This actually reminded me of, as I was thinking about that, and thinking about technology and kids and exposure and stuff and the world and just, the filth that we want to keep out, right? I also thought about Elmo now. Don't worry, I don't have anything necessarily against Elmo or whatever. That's a topic for another day. But when my kids were really little, they were in church and really, really little, barely talking, right? And one of them came home, I think it was probably my oldest, and I changed her diaper, and she pointed to her diaper that had Elmo on it. And I had never really discussed it with her because I didn't really care. To be honest, it didn't matter to me. Elmo was just Elmo. She hadn't watched Elmo or anything like that. She was barely 2. And she points down to her diaper and says, Elmo! And I was like, okay, where did you learn Elmo? And I just thought it was very strange. And the very next Sunday, I was scheduled to work in the nursery. And there was a worker there that was always in the nursery with my kids. And, she was a regular volunteer. And she was standing there changing a diaper. And she points to Elmo and says, oh, let's tickle Elmo. And I thought, this is where she learned Elmo. Now, okay, I don't really care that the Sunday school worker taught my kids about Elmo before they even knew what it was. But the point that I want to make is this. When our kids are not in our care, which is a lot, they're exposed to things. It just happens, right? These are just kind of, unless you're going to put your kids in a bubble, and let's face it, we're not. We can't possibly do that. There is a chance of exposure. There is absolutely no escape. So, as parents, though, we kind of take 2 paths, and that's what I want to talk about today, is what paths we take and how we can get to the path that's really going to guard the hearts of our kids, okay? So let's first talk about the 2 paths that we take as parents. The first one is the path of fear. You might know it well because it's something that we as parents are so often, we gravitate towards this. And let me tell you what some of the examples of what a fearful parent will do. absolutely no exposure to friends. We won't let our kids be near friends. We won't let them talk to friends. We won't let them, as they get older, they're not allowed to, talk on the phone. They're not allowed to have, any kind of, one-on-one time with a friend. It might be having devices that I have a friend who recently said that her children would not get devices until they were 18 because she didn't want to have the risk of anything. We might not let them go to camp. We might say they might learn about Elmo at church, and so we shouldn't let them go, right? We might go to that extreme. We might follow them to college. I had a friend this week that was telling me about how shocked she was as she took her son to college orientation at how many of the parents stayed in every single activity, despite the fact that the college was encouraging the parents to step away a little bit and let their child get acclimated to some of these things that they were doing. But the parents just could not do that. And the reason that we can't do that is because we're afraid. We are so afraid. And there are a lot of things to be afraid about, right? We were, no doubt. And again, well, we'll get to that in a minute. But these are the kinds of behaviors that we see when fear is the way we parent. We restrict, forbid, we push, and we control. And none of those are really words we want to have in our parenting. I'll show you why. I'm not saying, by the way, that means that we're never going to tell our kids no or anything like that. But these are the words that define fear. So what's the alternative? Let me show you. If we want to impact the hearts of our kids, we have to think about, okay, so what is it? What is the heart of my child? That's their character, right? That's who they are. And you've probably heard the definition before. Your character is who you are when no one is looking, right? Not when mom is standing there micromanaging every moment of your day, following you to your college classes, all of this stuff. That's not who you are. Who you are is who you are when mom isn't standing there, when dad isn't standing there, when you have to make choices, right? So if we want to parent in a way that will help our children with those choices, we have to do it in faith. So instead of fear, we're going with faith. Okay. Now, if we're parenting in faith, these are our goals. We're going to equip our kids. We're going to teach them. We're going to train them, and we're going to guide them. Those are our words, right? Now, doesn't that sound a little bit better than forbidding and restricting? Note that some of the behaviors might not be that different. Does that mean we're going to give a 4-year-old an iPhone and say, hey, call whoever you want, honey? No, of course not. That wouldn't be equipping or training or teaching or guiding at all. But this is very different sounding than that, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the teaching and the guarding of your children's hearts and what that looks like. So if we know that we want to teach them, we want to help them to guard their heart instead of just, restricting them. Like I mentioned before, when I was cleaning the neighbor's house, my mom never could have fathomed that something like that may have happened, right? So I needed to be prepared for what to do. And I was. I saw it and I said, oh, I don't want anything to do with that. Shoved it back under the bed and ran, right? Because I didn't want that. Now, if I didn't actually kind of know what it was and I wasn't prepared, if my mom hadn't already taught me how to identify the possible enemies that might come, after me, I wouldn't have known what to do. I probably would have been pretty curious, right? You know what happens when you're curious? You spend more time looking and exploring and figuring that out. That day, I probably would have been exposed to some things I'd never forget. And I'm really glad that I had the training that I needed to walk away from that. And that's what I want to give to my kids. I want to give them the training that they need to guard their hearts. So whenever they come up with whatever it is that they get exposed to, whether it's, I had a friend who's young son at the age of 8 came across some dirty images on his Kindle. Maybe it's, a bully in a church even. Yeah, they exist there. Whatever it is, that they know what to do, right? So First, if the first thing we need to do to teach our kids how to guard their heart is we're going to have to teach them about the enemies. So, and I mean, when we talk about enemies, sometimes we talk about, the flesh, and we talk about Satan, and we talk about the world, and most certainly those things are enemies. But when we're talking about the enemies of our heart, really we're talking about the things that can get into our heart and just wreak havoc on them and cause us to not be able to function and cause our lives to not work the way that they're supposed to work in a godly way. So what are some of those things? These are the things we want to teach our kids to guard and to keep out of their heart. Just to lock out. Complaining, grumbling. I like to call this the heart murmur. Because it's just this little thing in the heart that kind of keeps going, and it's so deadly. It was deadly to the Israelites. It was the reason why they had so many problems. It's just as deadly to us. That little complaining and grumbling, that little heart murmur, man, it is not ideal. Anger, bitterness, desire and lust, unbelief. That's one that a lot of people don't even realize is such an enemy. It is so easy for us to not believe what God said is true. And that leads us down all kinds of paths when, we're trying to go through life and face circumstances that we face. Pride is another one. Fear, despair, or depression is another one. Like that's something we can talk ourselves into stuff like that sometimes, not always. We won't go there, but that is something we can do. Also, just having a divided heart, having a heart after another God, basically an idol, whether it be money or something we want or something we desire, right? So those are the enemies that we want to teach our kids to keep out of our hearts. We can do that by looking up in the Bible, right? There's a lot of verses. There are so many verses for each one of those. And when I mentioned them, you were probably like, yeah, that. And I know verses about that. That's because these really are things we need to be guarding ourselves against. And, draw a giant heart on your wall and write those things in so your kids can see these are the things I want to keep out, right? So that's what we want to keep out. So if we're going to keep some stuff out, what are we going to keep in? And how are we going to keep those things in? So this is what our heart needs. First, it needs preparation. That just basically means we need to prepare our heart to deal with all the things that we have to deal with. How do we do that? Scripture, time with God, praying, the Bible, that kind of thing. I always encourage my kids, if you don't know any scripture at all, if there's nothing that you can recall in your mind to help you when you get in trouble, it's useless. Like, it's just useless. You've got to have something to help you. You've at least got to have some idea where you might be able to Google for the thing, right? Whatever, find the scripture. We've got to have some idea. It's kind of like saying, well, I know it's in the Bible somewhere is real similar to saying, I know that the mall is here in this town somewhere. You're never going to get there if you don't actually know where to find it. So preparation is important. The second step is purity and having a pure heart and looking for ways that we can protect our hearts. And that would mean I teach my kids two things. One, your eyes, so the things that you see, which isn't just dirty things, it's just wrong things. Things that would sway your mind, things that would keep you from being content, for example, like commercials and things like that, or HGTV. I hate to pick on that particular channel, but I only get to watch it every now and then when I'm somewhere. And this particular place that I have an appointment on a regular basis, and they play it there, and I always see it, and I think, I'm so glad I don't have this in my house, because I think I would watch it all day long, and I would think, oh, I need that in my house, and I need that in my house, and oh, I would like that in my house, right? That's something we need to keep our eyes from seeing so that it doesn't get into our heart. Our eyes just are the filter. Right? Also, our ears, the things that we hear, whether it be words that are said in movies or whatever, or just music or just movies. I mean, all of those kinds of things. All right. So preparation we need purity. We need a right focus, helping ourselves focus on God, right? We need to make sure we have that right focus. We need right priorities. So what comes first in your life? And one of the verses that we talk about a lot when it comes to guarding our heart is probably one you know well. That's Proverbs 4:23. And it says, keep thy heart with all diligence above all things, actually it says. And so that's really important, because God is not just telling you keep your heart, keep it pure, keep it clean, guard it from the enemies. But in addition to that, he says, above all things. This is super important. Your heart is super important. And for your reference, in case you don't know this, to tell your kids especially, but also yourself, in this verse and in this passage, and usually in the Bible, when the word heart is used, it's actually not referring to your feelings or your emotions completely. It's referring to your mind and your will and your emotions. So all of those things. It's not just the feely, ushy, gushy stuff, right? Okay, so preparation, purity, right focus, and right priorities, and then finally, principles. Now, principles are the key to helping your children figure out what to do with, say, one of these, right? Because you as a parent, and you probably know this already, could lock this thing down to the T and you'll still miss something, right? You could do that with any relationship that your kids have with a teacher or a friend. There's no way to fathom the kind of trouble that your kids could get into. Like, we just don't know. So instead of having this huge arsenal of rules, we need to make sure our kids have definitely some guidelines, definitely some rules, but most importantly, principles to live by. Who are they when no one's looking? What are the principles that guide their life, so that, when it is time someday for your child to go to college, you can drive them there and you can drop them off and you can say, I know this is going to be great. I know this is going to be wonderful, because they have principles. They know what to do when they get into trouble. They know what to do when someone teaches them the wrong thing about this, or attempts to teach them the wrong thing about this, or, whatever it is. And when our kids have those principles, we know that they can fall back on those things, instead of just saying, oh, well, let me give you a great example. Corrie ten Boom, right? I absolutely love her story. And, she was a woman who lived by principles, most certainly, but also by rules. And one of the things that their family did very well was they obeyed the law, right? But then something changed in their life, and it became that the law was no longer, fair, and they were punishing and hurting people. And eventually, Corrie ten Boom and her entire family started hiding Jewish people in their house, in the walls of their house, to save them, right? So if she was guided by rules and just said, I have to obey the law, and I'm going to have to do, what this German officer says that I'm going to have to do, she would have had a very, very hard time deciding what to do. But when she was guided by principles, and she knew the right thing to do was to preserve human life and to obey God above all, right? Suddenly, it's not as hard as, it seems. And I hope and pray that our children will never be faced with a decision like that, but they are faced with decisions every single day to try to decide and discern, what do I do in this moment? Because mom might not have given us an exact example of what's happening in this exact moment. We can't always be there. So helping our kids to know what to do to guard their heart and to keep them, living by the principles that they want to live in is huge. Now, one thing I want to tell you about this. I hope this was super helpful to you, by the way, and encouraging. And I do want you to notice that I didn't at all tell you when or where or how you should bring these things into your life, because I cannot tell you that. I don't know what's best for your family, but I do know that forever forbidding is definitely not the way. We can't parent in fear. We have to parent out of faith and knowing that we need to be training our kids. And when I do get ready to share devices and texting privileges and going with friends to some places privileges and all of those things with my kids. I have to do that with the faith that I've trained them and I've equipped them and I've helped them learn to guard their hearts and that they know what to do, no matter what, right? And so one of the things that I want to share with you today that I'm super excited about is, and if you've been following if you've been with us for long, you know that we have a new Bible study that came out and was available at convention this year and hasn't been available on the site yet, but I'm excited to tell you it is now officially at this moment available on the site, and it is called Keep Thy Heart. And so if you were listening to all of this and you thought, I really want to help my kids with that, this is something that we really need to study, this is the study for you. And I'd love to, of course, you can do those things on your own, but if you would like an easy way to do that and to talk about it as a family, this study would be a great fit. The study is actually a little different than our normal studies. It's 5 weeks. We normally do 4 weeks, but this was such an important topic. I had a really hard time getting it into 4 weeks. So we expanded it just a tad this time. Now, I want to tell you just briefly what the study is all about. So we start in week 1 by talking about your heart. And we kind of go through in depth a little bit of just why is this so important and what does the Bible say about protecting and guarding your heart and, what comes out of your heart and all of that kind of stuff. And then we go into the enemies. Those are the 9 things that I shared with you too, like the heart murmur, the complaining, the anger, and the bitterness and the desire and the lust and all of that. And then we go into the next part, which is pondering the path. And that's where we talk about how to strengthen your heart, the preparation, the scripture memory and stuff like that, purity, pure hearing, pure sight, and all of that, your right focus and your principles and your priorities. So that is all here in this study. So that's something you can grab if that's something your family would like to go through. A lot of times, there's 2 questions people ask me about this, so I'll answer them here and then we'll end. There are 2 versions. There's a junior and a youth version. The junior version is younger. The youth version is older. We're starting to move towards, if you haven't noticed this shift in all of our Bible studies, the junior versions are starting to move towards elementary age, and the youth versions are middle school, high school age. So that's kind of the way they're going to be. Eventually, they'll all be pretty much along those age ranges. We're going to be adding and tweaking a little bit to some of our earlier studies that we wrote and kind of adjusting there. So if you've been along for a while, but that's what would be appropriate for these studies. When I do these with my family, the way I like to do them is I give a book to each child. They go off and do it on their own. And then we come back together and we study it. We talk about it, and just as a family, we discuss it. And the reason I think this is so huge is just the same reason why you go to, women's Bible studies as a parent. When you study the Bible yourself and then you come and you talk about it with your friends, it is so much deeper. And, if we did it all as a family, sometimes kids fall under the radar and they get lazy and they let other people answer for them or whatever. And, this way they get it personally. They get the experience of personally doing it, but then they also get the experience of the deeper knowledge of doing it together. So that's how we do it. There are lots of ways to do it. The cool thing about all of our studies is no matter what level you're in, you're always doing the same exact topic and talking about the same things each day. So that's very cool. So there's a link at the bottom of this Facebook post where you can click to read kind of everything that I have said to you and shared to you in a printed version. And also there's a link to these if you are interested in checking those out too. So that's all for today. Thanks for joining me. I pray that you are encouraged and helped and that you are ready to parent out of faith and not fear, and that we know that God is always faithful to us, and that we can be sure that if we parent faithfully and obediently, that He will fill in the gaps that we miss. And that is such an encouragement. It is such an encouragement to me, and I know to you too. So, all right, have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me.